Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever it is you're coming from. Thanks for joining. Super excited today to be here with the Autism Café Instagram account. I'm also known as Eileen Lamb. And Eileen, just as kind of a basic intro of who she is, if you don't know who she is, Eileen has over 137,000 followers on Instagram, which is really amazing. We'll get to that in a little bit, though. And she is an accomplished photographer. Just check out her Instagram and you can see a little bit of taste of that. Once again, another thing we'll get to. And the author of 2 books, All Across the Spectrum and Be the One. She lives in Austin, Texas with her husband and 2 kids. So that's kind of your intro. But thank you so much for joining, Eileen. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I came across your Instagram page through my work with Only Human. So I was just kind of looking at a bunch of different pages and things like that. And I did a lot of work with them for autism awareness. And I was just kind of looking up different Instagram accounts that interested me, and I came across yours. And you have quite a story. You have, a lot of really cool stuff going on. You put a lot of like hard work into the things that you do in the books and the website and the Instagram, and it's really cool to see and pretty inspiring for me. I'm like, oh, I need to work harder on my stuff. So I always say that we can't talk about where somebody is until we talk about where they came from. So if you don't mind, just tell us a little bit about your story, your background. Go as far back as you want to go or whatever that may be. But just tell us a little bit about your story.
So I was born in France. You will hear it because of my accent. I came to the United States when I was 21. So I was really born and raised in France. I came here as an au pair, and then I met my husband, and I never went back to France. That's pretty much how I got here. And then I started my Instagram account, and it really turned into a full-time job, a full-time thing. I'm a photographer and an author, like you mentioned. I'm on the autism spectrum. I'm autistic, and so are my 2 children, Charlie and Jude. And that's basically what I talk about on my Instagram page, autism, that is.
Yeah, so thank you so much for that. It's an interesting background. I haven't really talked to somebody who, was born and raised in a different country and came over as an adult. So what was that experience like coming over? Because I feel like it's a lot different if you're a child and you come over, but you were already an adult when you came over. So was that actual transition from going from like France to America? Like, did you know English? Like, was it really jarring, like the cultural differences? Like, how was the actual transition for you?
Well, some things were great because I felt like American people. I mean, I live in Austin, Texas. That's where and everyone was so welcoming and warm, like strangers. And it was so nice because coming from France, people are pretty cold in the streets.
Really?
Strangers. It's really strange experience coming from France to Texas. But yeah, I didn't know much English. I knew English from school. So like, hey, how are you? My favorite color is rainbow. That type of stuff, so not very useful. And I was an au pair, which is like a nanny for a family. So
Yeah.
I was basically learning English with a 2-year-old boy. And I remember the first time I went to the coffee house for breakfast, and I asked them for a juicy because I wanted a juice. And they sort of looked at me like really funny. And then I asked the mom, the host mom, as we called her, the mom of the little boy I was watching. She said, oh yeah, juicy is a word only used by toddlers. They add a Y at the end of words.
Yeah.
So there was a learning curve there with English.
Yeah.
But then I met my husband, like I said, and I learned like adult English. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's so interesting when I think about that. I've taken trips over to Europe, and you notice these little cultural differences and different ways of saying things and interpreting things and things. So I'm always curious to kind of hear about that. You talked about your Instagram channel and starting that. Has there been a transition since you've had your children or you've gotten married? Like, when did you start the channel, and has it always kind of been the same, or has it kind of evolved over the years?
It's evolved a lot. Well, first I started talking about autism on Facebook, um,
Okay.
because that's where like my family is. I just wanted to keep them updated on my son's autism journey. It was just easier, and then it kind of took off from there.
Yeah.
But on Instagram, I used to post pictures of my kids in their clothes, because I like clothes
Yeah.
for the kids, and I would share like the brands we like, and so it was just pictures of the kids in their favorite clothes, my favorite clothes for them. Let's be real. Um, and then once my blog kind of took off on the internet, that's when I started switching my Instagram page from just like posting cute pictures of my kids to more of like an advocacy and like talking about autism and all of that. And I really got into photography back then too, more into like the professional side of it, not just, oh, my kids are cute, I'll take a picture, you know. And that's how it all evolved.
Yeah. Well, you're a phenomenal photographer. I really like your pictures. I like the kind of vibe of your page and the pictures that you get, the lighting, everything. It looks really good. So I dabble in photography. I'm not, I dabble. But yeah, it's really nice stuff. You take really lovely pictures. So it's interesting to kind of, when I think about the evolution of channels, you can kind of scroll through somebody's, like Instagram, and you can see, okay, the pictures are looking different. She's talking about different subjects now. You can kind of see that evolution happen, which I always think is interesting. So something else I'm really interested in is what I named earlier, your books. So with your first one, All Across the Spectrum, tell me about that process. Like, was it something that was on your mind for a while? Were you kind of building it slowly, or did it just hit you one day? Were you just sitting down or doing something? You're like, you know what? I need to tell this story. And for those out there that don't know about it, maybe just talk a little bit about what the book is about in general.
Yeah, well, it's funny because when I was a kid, I always told people I'm gonna be an author. But when kids say things
Yeah.
like that, you're like, yeah. But
Or
it's
that's
all,
cute.
yeah. And in me though, I've always known like that's what I wanted to do. And after Charlie, my oldest, was diagnosed with autism, I was diagnosed with autism, um, and I felt like I had so many things to tell.
Yeah.
And the best way for me to express myself is in writing and in photography. And I started writing a book proposal, and I sent it to a bunch of people who were like, yeah, it's great, but you know what, autism is talked about so much. No, basically. And then I found a publisher who was like, oh my god, your Instagram, your pictures, your story, like all
Yeah.
of that is so great. And what do you think about telling your stories in both words and pictures? Like, we tell your stories, but we also add your photography.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, that's amazing. I didn't even think of it. That wasn't my idea, to add the photography to my book, but I loved it. And so my book, All Across the Spectrum, is about my journey growing up in France with undiagnosed autism, and then my son's journey. And it's really about making people feel less alone in their journey, because raising an autistic child can be, I mean, isolating. There is a lot to learn, and so that was really like for other parents out there. But I added my photography because I feel like sometimes a picture can tell so much. So yeah, it's like a coffee table book,
Yeah.
I would say. That's with a bunch of small stories, because as a mom, I know that people don't have a lot of time to like sit down and read a book. So it's really divided into I forget how many, but like maybe 30 small stories, so you can like pick it up. It's an easy read. And yeah, that's my first book, All Across the Spectrum. And my second, I worked on it for a very long time, and it's more about the fact that social media is dictating a lot of how people feel these days. It's like, I feel like people are afraid to express emotions and feelings, and it makes other people around them again feel so lonely, because we feel like we're just the only one feeling the way we feel. Like, it's hard to talk about feeling depressed when you see like all these Instagram accounts, how they have their life together. And so it's like a very vulnerable book. No pictures, no anything. It's just like a bunch of stories about anxiety, depression, love, friendship, all of these things that we don't talk about enough.
Um, yeah, I was really excited to talk about your second book in particular, Be the One, and I know it's coming out soon, right? I think in June you said it's coming out.
Yeah, it's currently being printed. It's
Oh,
already available for pre-order, but it will be
yeah.
out in June. Yeah.
I wanted to touch on that one specifically because I went onto your website and I read the intro to the book. And I just have to say, I'm being completely honest. Like it made me cry when I read the intro. I
Oh,
thought it was so beautiful, and you touched on so many things that I wholeheartedly agree with. That's you touched on a lot of things of what I try to represent in my channel is, we shouldn't just talk about the positive, happy things that make us smile. We shouldn't just show the best moments of our lives. Like we should not just we need to talk about everything. We need to talk about the things that make us cry and the things that make us sad and the things that make us angry and the things that are hard to deal with. And reading your intro was so beautiful and so inspiring. So I can't wait to read that book. I'm super excited for it, and I'm definitely going to pre-order it. But it's the
thank
intro
you.
itself. I was like, I was hooked with the intro. So I'm going to put all the links and everything in my description below about like where people can access your website and Instagram and pre-order your book, because just being perfectly honest, the intro was so beautiful. So thank you for that. And thank you for
Thank
being
you.
willing
Yeah.
to be honest and raw and express your journey. I think it's a really incredible thing. So, um, kind of talking about a little bit more of what you touched on is, it seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, you said you weren't diagnosed as autistic until you were a little bit older, correct?
No, that's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was
And
diagnosed after my son.
okay, so if you don't mind, what was that process actually like? Because I feel like you hear a lot about people being diagnosed when they were younger. And in a previous video that I did, I think it was with Only Human, I have a friend that wasn't diagnosed until they were 30 with autism. So that was a real process for him. He really had to kind of go through that and seek it out, seek out that diagnosis. So was it similar for you? Did you kind of have to seek it out, and why did you feel like you wanted to do that?
Yeah, yeah, I had to seek it out too. I mean, so my son was diagnosed with autism when he was not even 2, and I
Mhm.
told my mom in France, Charlie is autistic, and my oldest son, Charlie, is considered severe. Like he doesn't talk, and anyway, I told my mom, and she said, "Well, it can be autistic because you are the exact same way as a child, except well, you talked a lot." I'm like,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
well, I know Charlie is autistic. They didn't make a mistake. And she was like, well, that's such an American thing, autism. And, I let it go. And then it got me thinking, though, but that's strange, though, what she said. And, as I was learning all about autism with Charlie, I started reading about high functioning autism, level
Yeah.
1 autism. And I was like, oh my God, this is me. Like,
Yeah.
this is crazy. But I didn't want to like self-diagnose myself from the internet, so I called autism specialist in Austin that we had actually seen for Charlie before, and I went through a therapeutic assessment. So it's like a dozen of hours of test and talking to my family members and all of that. And at the end of it, she said it. She's like, "Yeah, you have high functioning autism." She's like,
Wow.
"Wow."